Imagine being told you can't have something because, well, you're just deemed too dangerous. But the person telling you that is like the only person who has ever actually used that exact thing to destroy a city.
Yeah, it's a completely jarring contradiction. I mean, when you start pulling at the threads of who is allowed to hold ultimate power, the entire fabric of international rules can start to look incredibly arbitrary.
Right, exactly. And whether you're catching up on global politics, prepping for a debate, or you're just intensely curious about how international power dynamics actually function behind closed doors, we are breaking down a truly fascinating argument for you today. So welcome to the deep dive.
Thanks. Glad to be here to unpack this one.
Our mission today is to dig into a single massive question presented in an audio source we received. The file is just titled Iran's Bomb. And the core question the speaker wrestles with is, why is Iran explicitly forbidden from having a nuclear bomb when so many other nations currently possess them?
Right. And the speaker in our source material, they don't treat this question like some abstract academic puzzle. They treat it as an urgent, ticking clock.
Oh, totally.
They build a case that this specific ongoing standoff over Iran's nuclear capabilities is acting as a massive anchor, like dragging down the entire global economy.
Which is a huge claim to make.
It is. The source argues that the geopolitical friction, the endless sanctions, and the military posturing are leading directly to universal economic collapse. In their view, this single issue is creating worldwide hunger, poverty, homelessness, and fundamentally pushing humanity dangerously close to a catastrophic Third World War.
Those are just staggering stakes to attach to one nation's nuclear program. But before we get into the weeds of the speaker's logic, we really need to set a clear baseline for you, the listener.
Yeah, that is a crucial step because the source material deals with highly charged geopolitical topics. I mean, it directly calls out specific world leaders and sovereign nations.
Definitely.
So it's important to state upfront that our goal in this deep dive is not to endorse or take sides on any of these viewpoints. Our role is strictly analytical here. We're going to map out the logical progression the speaker uses to arrive at their ultimate conclusion, exploring the arguments exactly as they are presented in the source.
Okay, let's unpack this. So, to figure out why Iran is so heavily isolated, the speaker in our source essentially acts like a detective, right? Trying to reverse engineer a hidden rulebook.
Exactly. They systematically test different hypotheses to find out what the actual criteria for this exclusive nuclear club might be.
And the logical first filter they apply is demographics, specifically religion.
Yeah, the speaker starts by asking people around the globe, just surveying individuals of different ethnicities, religions, colors, races, why Iran is forbidden from having an atom bomb.
And what do people say?
Well, the most common reflex answer they get from the general public is that Iran is a Muslim country, and therefore they inherently cannot be trusted with an atom bomb. It's basically a demographic assumption based on a broad cultural stereotype.
Right, which you can argue that looking at religion is an overly simplistic way to analyze complex geopolitics. But the speaker does this intentionally, to rule out the most common baseline assumptions held by the public. And they immediately subject this religious hypothesis to a reality check.
It falls apart almost instantly when you look at the actual map of nuclear-armed nations. The speaker points directly to Pakistan.
Right.
Pakistan is a predominantly Muslim country, and Pakistan possesses an atom bomb. Logically, if the Islamic religion was the universal disqualifying factor, Pakistan would have been barred as well.
Exactly. So the speaker uses this single glaring data point to completely dismantle the idea that Islam itself is the barrier to entry. I mean, if you think the dress code is religion, you look inside the VIP club and see everyone is wearing something different.
That's a great way to put it. And the source doesn't stop with Pakistan. They go on to meticulously list the other club members to prove this point beyond any shadow of a doubt.
Let's hear the list.
They really map the board here to show how diverse the nuclear club actually is from a religious standpoint. If the barrier isn't being Muslim, maybe it's something else. The speaker points to India, which possesses the bomb and is predominantly Hindu.
Then they move across the globe.
Right. They note that China, with its deep Buddhist history, has an atom bomb. Then they look at the heavily Christian-influenced nations. England has an atom bomb. Germany has an atom bomb. France has an atom bomb.
Russia too?
Yep, Russia has an atom bomb. And of course, the United States of America has an atom bomb. So when you lay all of that out, every mainstream world religion is heavily represented by the nations holding this technology.
Wow. So the religious barrier theory just completely shatters. It simply does not hold water, which means the speaker's detective work is back to square one. When the demographic argument fails to explain the isolation, the narrative usually pivots to something much harder to quantify.
Yeah, the speaker moves from looking at the religion of the country to examining the psychology of the people in charge.
Right.
The source introduces this next hypothesis by looking at the argument of mental stability. They anchor this point by pulling a very specific piece of rhetoric from former American President Donald Trump.
Oh, this is where it gets interesting.
Yeah, the speaker notes that President Trump referred to Iranian leadership as lunatics and called them mentally unstable.
Which is where things get highly subjective. Because how does the international community actually measure or regulate stability?
It's tough. But the source observes that this rhetoric from Donald Trump caused a massive storm of debate and agreement on global social media. People just latched onto the concept that Iran simply cannot be trusted because their leaders are perceived as irrational or crazy.
So to explore this lunatic test, the source dives into the mechanics of what they call the Atom Club, referring to the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, which acts as the global watchdog.
Right, and the speaker acknowledges a critical nuance here. Nuclear technology is not inherently or exclusively about destructive weapons. It is a dual-use technology.
Right, have peaceful uses.
It has highly beneficial, absolutely essential uses worldwide, specifically for producing massive amounts of electricity and for vital medical applications like imaging and cancer treatments.
Let's pause and explain the mechanism there because it is vital to understanding the speaker's frustration. Dual-use technology means the exact same infrastructure can be used for peace or for war.
Exactly.
Like a centrifuge is a machine that spins uranium gas at supersonic speeds. If you spin it for a little while, you get low-enriched uranium, which is reactor fuel for electricity. But if you just leave those exact same machines running longer, the uranium becomes highly enriched. It becomes weapons grade.
Right.
So the physical line between building a power plant and building a bomb is practically invisible without someone looking over your shoulder.
And that invisible line is entirely why the IAEA exists. The theoretical rule of this international club is that to access the peaceful, beneficial technology, you must prove you are a responsible member.
You have to submit to regular, invasive inspections.
Right, and strict limits are placed on your facilities to prevent the creation of destructive bombs. The underlying premise is that only stable and responsible nations can be trusted to navigate that razor-thin line between beneficial energy and catastrophic weaponry.
Okay, I understand why those inspections are necessary. But wait, if we follow the speaker's logic, this is where the consistency of international law completely breaks down.
How so?
Well, if the rule is purely about responsible membership and mental stability and playing by the international rulebook, how does the speaker reconcile countries that blatantly operate outside those boundaries? Because looking at the source, it seems like the world is full of massive exceptions.
And what's fascinating here is how the speaker uses those very exceptions to expose what they view as a breathtaking global double standard. They set up a stress test for these international rules, starting with North Korea.
North Korea is a fascinating example because the rhetoric used against them is almost identical to the rhetoric used against Iran.
Yes. The source points out that the entire Western world freely uses the exact same lunatic label against North Korea's leadership. They're universally characterized as incredibly dangerous and unpredictable.
Yet they have bombs.
Right. As the speaker notes, North Korea doesn't just possess one atom bomb, they have successfully developed and tested several. If being universally declared a mentally unstable lunatic is the ultimate disqualifier for having a nuclear weapon, the existence of North Korea's arsenal proves that rule is not actually enforced.
The deterrent of international disapproval didn't stop them.
Not at all.
So the logic breaks. The crazy label doesn't actually prevent a nation from holding the weapon.
Then the speaker introduces a second, entirely different kind of counterexample to challenge the responsible membership idea. They bring up Israel.
The source highlights this part aggressively. It is a striking contradiction to the IAEA oversight framework we just talked about.
It really is. The speaker emphasizes that Israel is a very small country that completely bypasses the formal membership rules of this nuclear club. According to the source, Israel does not join the formal security memberships. They do not submit to the regular oversight and inspections of the international atomic organizations, and they openly possess an atom bomb with an attitude of, as the speaker phrases it, we don't care.
Wow. And the speaker asks a deeply probing question there, like, is that a responsible attitude? They explicitly say they wouldn't call it a lunatic attitude, but they point out that it entirely ignores the supposedly strict rules of international trust and security memberships.
Right.
It's like a neighborhood watch program where the only people allowed to have weapons are the ones who founded the watch, and they selectively ignore when certain neighbors bypass all the safety rules while aggressively policing one specific house on the block.
That analogy perfectly captures the hypocrisy the source is pointing out. The speaker uses these two drastically different examples: North Korea's perceived instability and Israel's outright rejection of the inspection rules, to thoroughly dismantle the idea that mental stability or responsible club membership is the actual prerequisite for nuclear armament.
Because the global community tolerates the bomb in the hands of leadership, it actively calls dangerous, and in the hands of a nation that ignores the oversight club entirely.
Exactly.
So we might be looking at this entire situation through the lens of idealism, expecting fairness, consistent rules, and moral high grounds. But the listener might be realizing right now that the speaker is exposing a system built entirely on realpolitik. The rules are not about morality. They are about preserving the current balance of power.
That is the core realization the source is driving toward. Power protects power.
So the speaker has crossed off religion, they've crossed off method stability and strict rule following. The criteria for who gets to hold this power seems completely arbitrary, which means the speaker has to turn to the ultimate, most rigorous test: historical precedent. If the world is terrified of who might be dangerous with a nuclear weapon, we have to look at who has actually proven to be dangerous with these weapons in the past.
And this leads to the most intense and, frankly, the most paradoxical argument in the entire source material. The speaker sets up a hypothetical scenario based on the world's standard assumptions. The theory is that if a lunatic, mentally unstable country gets a bomb, they will inevitably use it to destroy mankind.
Okay, that makes sense.
However, a gentleman country, a mentally stable, responsible, highly developed nation, will hold the bomb but never actually use it.
That is the classic theory of deterrence. The idea that you only possess the weapon to ensure no one else uses theirs, a stalemate of mutual assured destruction.
The speaker then applies this theory of deterrence to the actual historical track record of humanity. And the results are incredibly jarring. According to the framework of the Western world, the United States is considered the highest-ranking, most intelligent, and most mentally stable country on Earth, the ultimate gentleman nation in this context.
I want to break the fourth wall for a second here. If you are listening to this deep dive in the United States, or really anywhere in the West, this is the part of the speaker's argument that might make you uncomfortable.
Definitely. It challenges the foundational narrative of how global security is maintained.
But it is vital to understand how the speaker is constructing this historical logic.
Right. The speaker emphatically points out that despite being labeled the most mentally stable and responsible nation, the United States is the only country to have ever actually used the atomic bomb in a conflict.
And the source does not gloss over the human cost. The speaker specifically emphasizes that the U.S. did not just use it once, they dropped these incredibly destructive weapons twice on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Yes. And the speaker argues that this use was not required and that it intentionally targeted innocent civilian populations in Japan.
It's like arguing over who in the room is responsible enough to hold a match when the person claiming to be the absolute safest is the only one who has ever actually burned a house down.
That is a stark analogy. But yeah, the paradox the speaker highlights is glaring. The nation universally deemed most stable and responsible is literally the only one with a history of actual nuclear violence against a population.
Meanwhile, all the other nations possessing the bomb, including the ones the international community labels as dangerous, unpredictable, or unstable, have, to date, never used them to attack anyone.
It fundamentally upends the argument about who can be trusted. The speaker is building a case that the entire framework of international nuclear policy and the justification for keeping Iran isolated is an illusion.
We have followed the speaker through this entire logical maze. We watched them test the religious demographic theory, and that failed. We watched them test the mental stability and lunatic theory, and that failed when applied to countries like North Korea and Israel.
Right.
We watched them test the historical track record of responsible usage, and that revealed a massive, tragic contradiction. So what does this all mean?
Which brings us to the speaker's final radical synthesis. After conducting this research, talking to people globally to understand their assumptions, and looking at the undeniable facts of who holds these weapons, the speaker concludes that there is not a single consistent, logical reason why Iran is barred.
The speaker views the rules as a facade.
Based on the source, absolutely. Nations of all mainstream religions have them. Nations with aggressive rhetoric have them. Nations that refuse international oversight have them. And the nation with the most lethal historical track record has them.
So where does the speaker go with this realization? Because they set this up at the very beginning of the audio file as an urgent, immediate crisis that is causing global poverty and actively pushing us toward World War III. What is their actual solution?
Well, to prevent that exact catastrophic outcome, the speaker arrives at a surprisingly simple, albeit highly controversial, verdict. They argue that the ongoing friction over Iran's nuclear status, the sanctions, the threats, the military blockades, is the actual catalyst causing the economic collapse and the threat of global war.
Okay.
Because the speaker has determined there is no logical consistency to the ban in the first place, they conclude that the world should simply let Iran have the atom bomb.
Wait, just let them have it. Remove the barrier entirely.
Yes. The argument relies on the idea that eliminating this artificial, inconsistent barrier will immediately resolve the geopolitical crisis. In the speaker's view, acknowledging the reality of a multipolar world will stabilize the universal economy, end the cycle of sanctions causing hunger and poverty, and ultimately save the world from a destructive Third World War.
That is an incredibly bold conclusion to draw from that string of logic.
It's a conclusion born out of sheer frustration with a system of rules that the speaker believes makes absolutely no sense when applied to the real world.
It asks us to abandon the idea of non-proliferation entirely in favor of an aggressively leveled playing field, and it leaves you with an immense amount to chew on regarding how international power actually functions. Think back to that neighborhood watch analogy. You were standing on the street watching the founders of the watch enforce a rule that they themselves and their favored neighbors completely ignore.
Right.
It makes you wonder something profound as you look at global news today. If the rules dictating who gets to hold a weapon of mass destruction are truly as arbitrary and inconsistent as this speaker claims, are global treaties actually designed to keep the peace and protect humanity? Or are they simply a mechanism for those who already hold the ultimate power to delay an inevitable leveling of the playing field?
That tension between preserving peace and preserving power is a question that challenges the foundation of modern diplomacy.
It certainly challenges everything we assume about global order. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We love unpacking these complex, provocative arguments with you. We encourage you to keep looking past the official rule books, keep investigating the exceptions, and keep questioning the narratives behind the news. Until next time.